The year is 1312. Winter has come early, and it's not a gentle one. Snow lies heavy on the fields, the wind cuts through the valley, and the rivers are frozen solid. The last apples have long since rotted in their barrels, and the nights seem endless. In a small wooden house at the edge of a medieval village, a family huddles together by the fire. The walls creak. The wind moans through the thatched roof. A few embers glow in the hearth, the only barrier between them and the deadly cold outside. This is not the world of knights and castles, but of ordinary people, peasants who lived, worked, and fought every day against hunger, disease, and the cold. And somehow they survived. For the medieval peasant, winter wasn't a season. It was an adversary, a test that returned every year, as predictable as death itself. Life in medieval Europe was ruled entirely by the rhythm of nature. Summer meant planting, harvesting, preparing for the long months to come. Winter meant endurance, a time when the earth slept, and so did nearly every source of life and food. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. If your fire went out, if your roof collapsed under snow, if your stores of grain were spoiled, your entire family could freeze or starve before spring. Historians call this period part of the Little Ice Age, a centuries-long stretch of colder than average temperatures that began in the late Middle Ages. Rivers like the Thames in London and the Seine in Paris froze solid. Snow fell for months at a time. Even the southern fields of France and Italy saw frosts that destroyed crops. And for people who lived in mud-walled huts, the cold was merciless. The typical peasant's house was small, sometimes no more than 5 or 6 meters across. The walls were made of wattle and daub, sticks woven together and plastered with mud, straw, and dung. It was cheap, easy to repair, but terrible at keeping out the wind. The floor was hard-packed earth. The roof was thatched with reeds or straw, alive with rats and insects. When the wind blew, it whistled through every gap. When rain fell, it leaked through the roof and dripped into the ashes of the hearth. There was no chimney, only a small hole in the roof to let out the smoke. And often it didn't work. Inside, the air was thick with soot. It stung the eyes, coated the walls, and blackened the beams overhead. But without that fire, there was no light, no warmth, and no life. The hearth was the heart of the home. It burned day and night, tended constantly by whoever was awake. The fire was made from wood if you had it, or peat, or dried animal dung if you didn't. When supplies ran low, families would even burn old tools or bits of furniture just to keep the embers alive. The smoke never fully left. It lingered inside like a ghost, curling through the rafters, filling every crack and corner. And yet that smoke had its use. It helped preserve meat, drive away insects, and dry out the thatch above. In its own way, the smoke was a kind of insulation, unpleasant but necessary. Clothing was another crucial defense. Peasants couldn't afford fine fabrics or heavy furs, so they relied on what they could make themselves. Wool was their lifeline, spun from the sheep they raised, thick and warm even when damp. Every family had someone who could spin or weave. During the long winter evenings, women sat by the fire, carding wool and mending worn garments. A peasant's winter outfit was built in layers, a linen shirt or shift next to the skin, then a wool tunic, leggings or hose, and finally a heavy cloak. Men tied their cloaks with a simple brooch or a leather cord. Women wrapped themselves in woolen shawls and veils. Children often wore hand-me-downs, patched and frayed, but better than nothing. Shoes were made of leather, sometimes lined with straw for warmth. In deep snow, peasants might wrap their feet in rags or even animal skins. Gloves were rare, but woolen mittens or simple wraps were used when the cold was unbearable. Every layer mattered. There were no thermostats, no second chances. The wrong clothing could mean frostbite or death. Inside the home, warmth came not just from the fire, but from each other. Families slept close together, parents, children, sometimes even servants or neighbors in times of crisis. A straw bed, known as a palliasse, was laid directly on the ground. It was filled with hay, feathers, or old rags, and covered with a rough wool blanket or animal hide. The family slept in a huddle, pressing together for shared heat. Body warmth was the cheapest and most reliable energy source of all. Even the family's animals contributed. Cows, goats, pigs, and chickens were often brought indoors at night, their bodies radiating warmth into the small space. It wasn't glamorous. It was survival. Wet wool, straw, manure. A medieval cottage was not a pleasant place, but for those who lived there, it was a refuge, the thin line between life and death. Firewood, meanwhile, was precious beyond measure. Most of the forests were owned by local lords, so peasants were forbidden to cut down trees. Taking wood without permission was a crime called wood theft, punishable by fines, whipping, or worse. So people gathered what they could: fallen branches, twigs, and brushwood. They burned dried peat from the bogs, or cow dung shaped into patties. The fire didn't blaze bright. It smoldered, slow and smoky, but it was enough to keep frost from forming on the inside walls. In some regions, families built sleeping boxes or enclosed beds, wooden frames with curtains or lids that trapped heat from their own bodies. The air inside these boxes grew warm and stale, but it kept them alive through the coldest nights. Others hung thick wool tapestries or even old clothes on the walls to block the wind. Every scrap of fabric had a second use: insulation. During the daylight hours, the cold was kept at bay through work. There was no idleness in winter. Movement itself was a form of heat. Men repaired tools, mended fences, sharpened blades, or carved handles for plows. Women spun wool, wove cloth, baked bread, and tended to the children. Even small tasks like sweeping the floor or carrying water helped keep the blood flowing. But outside, the cold was relentless. Water froze in the wells. Animals' troughs had to be broken open with an axe. People wrapped themselves in cloaks, their breath turning white in the air. Frostbite was common, and chilblains, painful sores on the hands and feet, were a daily misery. And yet, they carried on. They had to. Nighttime brought its own challenges. When the sun set, often before 5 p.m. in midwinter, darkness closed in completely. Candles were a luxury, made from tallow or beeswax, and peasants used them sparingly. So most families relied on the flickering glow of the fire. Sleep came early, and often in two parts. People would go to bed soon after dusk, sleep for a few hours, then wake in the middle of the night, a time known as the watch. They might pray, talk quietly, mend clothes, or tend to the fire, before lying back down for their second sleep until dawn. This segmented sleep was a natural response to the long, dark winter nights. Even their diet changed to fight the cold. Winter meals were heavier, meant to keep energy high. Bread and pottage, a thick stew of grains and vegetables, were staples. Sometimes salt pork or dried fish was added, especially during Lent when meat was forbidden. Ale and weak beer replaced water, since they were safer to drink and full of calories. The warmth of the fire and the richness of the stew became comforts as real as any blanket. Food was warmth in every sense, but survival wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. The cold was often seen as a punishment, a trial sent by God to test endurance and faith. Villagers prayed for mild winters and good harvests to come. Church festivals like Christmas and Candlemas were bright lights in the darkness, times of celebration when even the poorest shared what little they had. Religious belief gave meaning to suffering. It turned hardship into something divine. If you could endure the winter, you had proven your worth before God. And still, tragedy was never far away. Every winter claimed lives: the old, the sick, the hungry. Frostbite could cripple a farmer. Smoke inhalation could sicken a child. If the harvest had been poor, famine loomed. There are chronicles from the 14th century that describe families eating bark, grass, or even the bodies of the dead to survive the worst winters. It's difficult for us to imagine that level of desperation, but for medieval peasants, it was part of life's rhythm. Every spring felt like rebirth, because every winter felt like dying. And yet, despite all this, they found moments of peace. Winter evenings were times for storytelling, music, and closeness. Neighbors gathered around each other's hearths, sharing ale and tales of saints and heroes. Children played in the straw, listening to their parents' voices. Laughter still existed, even in the coldest season. There was warmth not just in fire, but in fellowship. The Middle Ages were harsh, but never devoid of humanity. As centuries passed, life slowly improved. Chimneys began to replace roof holes, letting fires burn hotter and homes stay cleaner. Glass windows appeared in wealthier cottages. Wool production increased, and trade brought better fabrics and tools. But for most people, even into the 16th century, the essentials of winter survival hadn't changed. A fire, a roof, and a family. That was all you needed, and all you had. And cathedrals. But the real Middle Ages, the ones lived by most people, happened around a smoky hearth on a frozen night. A child wrapped in a wool blanket, a mother stirring a pot of pottage, a father feeding the fire one last branch before dawn. The fight against the cold defined them, shaped their homes, their culture, their faith. It taught them resilience. It reminded them that warmth, like life, was fragile and precious. They survived not because the world was kind, but because they refused to let it kill them. And when the first green shoots pierced the frozen ground and spring returned to the land, they stepped outside, blinking into the light, and gave thanks. Because in the Middle Ages, survival was the truest miracle of all.